Basically, Kamamuta is the experience we all probably have felt in various domains in our lives, as well as with media examples, and that is that we feel kind of moved and touched. We have a warm, fuzzy feeling in the chest. Sometimes we have goosebumps or a lump in our throat, or we kind of touch our chest and say things like, "Aw, that's so cute," or "That's so sweet."
Okay, it's really interesting how much, or where you can apply Kamamuta. You would usually think maybe about romance novels or movies or something like that you maybe use in movies or in general, video material. But you can also use it for completely different things that maybe weren't intended to use them for. So you said before that it's also in animals. And do you know if there's also something like this, Kamamuta, that animals feel, like maybe mammals with social structures? Like if you think about a kitten, and I mean, people are usually like, "Oh, this is such a cute little kitten, such a fluff ball or something." But do you think that the mama kitten actually feels that too? Or is it something completely different in your opinion?
Good question. Good question. I mean, if we think about the sentient beings that animals are, then obviously it gets now into the just more physiological experiences that they have in relation to bonding and all these things. But just even thinking about relational models theory, I think is very much, at least that component of it, probably applicable to animal kingdom. It's just we can't ask them, right? So we don't know.
That's true. It's hard to measure. That's definitely a big issue with that, I think. But also just as if there's an evolutionary experience, has there been something like that already researched, or rather not?
Yeah, again, these are big, great questions for Alan. I wonder what he thinks about it, because he came up also with obviously the relational models theory way before Kamamuta came about. And I wonder if kind of from that evolutionary psychology perspective plays into that as well. I can see how it is reflected in it. Yeah. I don't know if that's something he consciously has thought about. He probably did, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but maybe future research will give some more answers to that topic, because I personally think it's also really interesting to think, because we had that discussion also with a professor of ours that probably fish are maybe not as likely to experience it, because they're more just swimming together and having a group to survive, but maybe other animals and maybe mammals with more complex structures and actually having this hierarchy as well, that maybe there's something like that too. But let's see what the future actually holds for us there. That's pretty cool. Okay, when you think about personality traits, because it's a positive psychology phenomenon, Kamamuta, and in your chapter you said that it correlates with empathetic concern and nostalgia, for example, these kind of personality traits. But are there some that actually correlate negatively with that? We were thinking maybe about stuff like psychopathy or narcissism or all these kind of things. Do you know if there's maybe a negative correlation, or that maybe some people can't really experience Kamamuta because of maybe mental issues, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, I'm not as well versed in that data itself to can tell you any studies, but kind of logically, right? If empathy is one of the main predictors or correlates, then the opposite, like psychopathy of a person that doesn't really have that, would probably be then a negative predictor for sure. Yeah.
That would also be really interesting to think about that and make studies about that if they haven't been done already. I think Kamamuta, as you said, is pretty new in the media context, especially. Maybe there's a lot of potential to actually do a lot of more research and to get to know that phenomenon even more.
Yeah, and I mean, when we think of the overlap now with Kamamuta and elevation, Mary Beth has done some work with the dark triad and elevation as a response, and we know there that there is a negative relationship between people that score high on those kind of more darker personality traits and them basically not experiencing elevation or transcendent experiences as much. Yeah.
Okay, it would actually make like a close connection between Kamamuta as well and maybe the dark triad, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really important in all, like a lot of other theoretical concepts as well, like for example, transportation and parasocial interactions and relationships and all these kind of things. Has there been some interplay maybe that they kind of influence Kamamuta? Do you know, like maybe transportation, PSIs, PSBs, for example?
Yeah, that's interesting. That would be a nice path analysis study, right? To see how
That's
that can be, they can be mediators for the experience, specifically in the context of media. I think specifically, again, applying kind of the lens of just general transcendent emotions, we know that yes, identification, transportation are certainly can impact the emotional experience we have from media stimuli naturally. Just kind of like how they impact the entertainment experience. So I would expect the same thing for if we measure Kamamuta in the end, for sure.
Yeah, it would make a lot of sense, like especially when you think about scientific measures in general, and to actually just, you know, try to combine a lot of things to actually make that into a bigger concept that it maybe already is. And yeah, just to keep going, because it's really interesting. Like I have to say, I learn a lot from you right now. Like, thank you very much for that. And again, is it like a positive emotion again, a universal one, as was mentioned in the chapter, and it's culture specific, it was said. Do you know if there's something different between collectivistic cultures, like for example, China and Japan, where the individuum is like a lot different in the context and social structures, or individualistic countries? Like, do they experience Kamamuta differently?
Good question. I think the idea with, so the concept is universal, but how it is specifically kind of labeled then is different based on cultures. That's why obviously the idea is that we shouldn't rely only on labels, but have all these other dimensions as well to measure along. But yeah, to that specific question of collectivistic and individualistic cultures, again, super good question for the social psychologists that study the concept. I have no idea. I don't know what could be, what would be our hypothesis here, so that maybe collectivistic cultured individuals would have a higher level of Kamamuta because of the just kind of connection and the relational aspect just is more important to them. Maybe that could be a hypothesis. Yeah,
maybe it could be like totally, because they have like a different social structure in general, and maybe have like also different cultures that maybe see Kamamuta as more profitable, actually more desirable if you have this kind of feeling or show that. So that would be, again, really interesting.
Yeah,
like we see, there's a lot of room for improvement and doing things. It's so interesting in general.
Yeah.
Really. And is there a dark side of Kamamuta actually? Like, is it maybe possible if someone experiences Kamamuta that they maybe act in a different or like a really negative way? Like, I don't know how to explain it really, but if you think about someone who really wants to protect their children, that they go to extreme measures to do that because of that feeling of connectedness with maybe their family, that they might commit crimes, for example. Like, have you thought about this as well? Because we just talked about this shortly with our professor, and it's really interesting, I think.
There's like the dark side of inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah.
How it's used in propaganda. And I mean, I can see, you know, that certainly be the case in terms of just media examples that use kind of the Kamamuta elicitors to then have people have that experience in order for them to like commit crimes or
maybe to manipulate them in general.
Yeah, exactly. So that certainly is the case for probably any kind of emotion eliciting situation that we plant into media or narratives. In terms of just kind of on like a social level, I mean, again, we're dealing with an emotional experience. So probably given different contexts, like, you know, sure, why couldn't it also lead to kind of more negative outcomes or like the dark side Described your own the context there with the extreme measures for the kid. I don't know then if, we can really still make the relationship between Muta as that in situ emotional experience and then somebody going out and committing a crime because they want to keep their connections to their kin. I mean, certainly from like an evolutionary standpoint, yes, obviously that's kind of the reason why a lot of, let's say, parents or their kids have been abducted, then just go on revenge and, do something against the law to make it right and then, do that. But obviously then the causal chain of things becomes a little bit more muddy that I don't know what leads to really what, but within the media context, I think that, just like with the dark side of inspiration that has been studied a little bit more, the same thing can apply to Muta in terms of just propaganda videos, for example. Or even, obviously, we can go into advertising, not so bad, but thinking about the Edeka commercial again. I mean,
it's for actually, consuming goods. So
it is.
One can argue if it's moral or good or bad.
Right, exactly. You're getting there in a little gray area there. But certainly, again, emotions are used to manipulate us in a way to, in that sense, have a positive affinity for Edeka. But
not about that specific example, but in general, I think also maybe in the political world, maybe if people know about Muta, maybe they could use that to actually use it maybe also for not bad things, but to actually gain an advantage. Because they know people really seek out this experience and really feel that and are easily manipulated by it. Maybe then it can also be used. That's something that we also wanted to ask maybe about the election in 2016. Not to say that that was the case, but do you think that the hostile media effect could have been negated, or it was negated with Muta experience? That someone, for example, who doesn't like Trump very much or doesn't like Hillary Clinton, doesn't really matter which candidate it is, that they maybe get convinced that they're like better or like actually have a more positive light on the candidate if they use these kind of contents. Because after like the model that we would think about, that it would be possible if you think about having a more positive relation to your out group, maybe that's also possible then in that area, right?
Right, and actually Thomas Schubert and Beate Seibt, I believe, are the authors of actually a study that did exactly that. They had a commercial for a political advertisement from Trump and from Hillary, and then basically had also Trump supporters and Hillary supporters consume either their favorite candidate's video or the other candidate's video. And both of those videos had Muta elicitors in them. And then they measured basically Muta and their, again, voting preference for each candidate. And so what happened is that the videos reinforced the already positive attitude that the participants had toward their favorite candidate, but they also liked to a certain extent the other video if it elicited Muta, like from the other candidate that wasn't their favorite. So it works even across that, even though of course the experience wasn't as, and then the voting tendency didn't change. And it was
maybe just having a bit more positive opinion about the candidate than maybe in that area, right? Like to think maybe they're not so bad after all.
They didn't measure any of that. They just kind of measured then voting preference. And so that again didn't change. But at least they still experienced Muta, even though it was from their non-favorite political candidate. So it certainly can be evoked. It can, I mean, in terms of the political spectrum we have here in the US, certainly can also then, of course, contribute more to the divide. So if both candidates use that mechanism or have Muta elicitors in their videos or advertisements, then the partisans just feel even stronger toward their candidates. But maybe even with a little bit more of cross campaigning, it could be lead to what you were saying, that maybe that they then look at the other candidate not as extreme anymore. And I don't think that has been measured in studies yet.
Okay, that's really interesting how much like or where you can apply Kamamuta. You would usually think maybe about romance novels or movies or something like that you maybe use in movies or in general like video material, but you can also use it for completely different things that maybe weren't intended to use them for. It's really interesting for that. And that's also a question that we want to ask you, especially regarding prejudices and discrimination. Are there like many or like are there any movies or series or videos that would actually help in this kind of battling these kind of negative things in society as well?
The idea would be yes, right? I mean, we already have some research again that looked at elevation in the sense that it again was measured with feeling, moved, touch. So some of that overlap with also how Kamamuta is measured with the vernacular labels, and we've seen that videos basically, if a person experiences elevation from a video, then it can reduce, and the video also contains kind of counter stereotype portrayals, then that can reduce stereotypes. There's one study again by Meredith Oliver that looked at implicit and explicit, and they did find even some small change in implicit attitudes as well. As well as specifically, obviously, greater connectedness to others, to kind of that other group, whatever that is. Again, from a racial standpoint or from a mental health kind of issues, like different.
Maybe also sexuality, like if you think about LGBTQ plus, for example. Yeah.
Yes. And so there is then basically that greater openness and feelings of acceptance toward those other groups, other from the participant itself. And so that's based on just right now as how transcendent emotions has been used as a measure or as a mediator for these outcomes. But again, my argument would be absolutely, if we measure Kamamuta, we basically would find the same thing, just because even from a theoretical standpoint, Kamamuta does reinforce kind of these connectedness experiences, generally obviously with one's kin, but then within the media example, it can also expand to strangers or just other people. So if we think of obviously Kamamuta as more of an umbrella concept also for transcendent emotions in general, then yeah, we would definitely see that as a strong mechanism for those more positive outcomes of stereotype reduction.
That's really good if that actually would like if it works, as you said, but if we could like use it more precisely maybe in the future, like researchers in general, also to like battle things again, racism, but maybe also bullying is maybe a point that can be used, like maybe from like showing children already maybe Kamamuta contents, that it really helps to get a more positive society, maybe like a big goal, but maybe it's possible. You
that's right. That's big. Yeah, absolutely.
That's really nice about the positive psychology kind of aspect, that you try to make the world a better place in a way. I think that's really nice, especially because media is everywhere, like social media is all over the place. And do you think like social media, like for example Instagram and Facebook, can make the world a better place? Because there's a lot of negative things, of course, they're really criticized all the time. But like when you share Kamamuta contents, does it help in a way?
That would be that would be the idea. I mean, I guess we have a little bit of research done, again, not looking specifically measuring Kamamuta, but just kind of looking at those transcendent emotions that seem to indicate that if people make the choice of consuming more of, let's say, Kamamuta content or inspirational content, then yes, it naturally makes them want to share it, because there is that outward orientation that these experiences elicit. And it does have a positive effect on their well-being. It's just that obviously with the way that the algorithms work in a lot of those platforms, we as the consumer have to really play an active role in what we consume and what we select on a given day.
Yeah, it's the same as you said, like even just researchers, what they use, it's the same for us in our everyday lives. So like what we use on the media, like actually influences us and how we think about the world and how we see it. That's really a good point.
Absolutely.
And especially like that's the last big question we have. If you think about the COVID-19 pandemic, is it possible that maybe Kamamuta actually also helps to maybe get people to apply more safety measures, like for example, wearing masks and getting vaccinated and all these kind of things, if they are used maybe in media in general? Do you think that they actually help in that kind of area as well?
In a health context, yeah, I love that application too. Yeah, I mean, theoretically, sure, right? Do we have data yet on that? Not that I know of. Okay. But yeah, I mean, again, obviously playing with emotions within health communication and persuasion is obviously the main thing to get a person to do a certain behavior. But right now, or in the traditional health com field, obviously these are more just the straightforward emotions that have been used to manipulate messages, but tapping a little bit more into those mixed and more complex emotions like a Muta experience hasn't been explored, but seems to have great potential. So yes, like let's study that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Like if anyone out there who watches this video really wants to do something to maybe help with the pandemic situation as well, there's a good topic for you, maybe for your thesis. Yeah. Nice. And just to round everything up, we just want to ask you some, maybe a little more playful question, not so serious. In general, like, do you prefer, like, because you mentioned, or like they were mentioned in your chapter, do you prefer Avengers Endgame or The Notebook, the movie? Like, what kind of those both is like, well, something you would more watch on a Friday night?
It depends on how I feel. If I have more cognitive capacity left to get a good cry in, then probably The Notebook. But then given the context that I'm also living with my husband, it would probably be the Avengers.
Okay, so he's a big fan of the Avengers.
Yeah, I got to watch all the Marvel series, and I mean, for me, I can really get into anything. Like if somebody's into something real, like Lord of the Rings, you know, I wasn't into it, and then somebody was, and I was like, okay, fine. And then now I'm into it. And so it's like, if I see somebody else that's really enthusiastic about something, I can get into it too.
Yeah, maybe that's also Muta, you know, this connectedness with each other and getting into something. Yeah, that's really good.
Totally.
And when it comes to talent shows and try not to cry challenges, what's your favorite there? Like, would you rather watch a talent show or a try not to cry challenge on YouTube?
Talent show. Because they make me cry too.
Okay.
Like talent shows are so, I mean, when like people do like these amazing, I have admiration, I get goosebumps, I have awe, I mean, all of it. So
the whole package.
Have those experiences. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, same. Like it's so impressive what people do, especially like if they have some really difficulties that they got over, like this overcoming of obstacles is like also really important for Muta. And just in general, it's like, damn, it's like so good if you watch that. That's true.
Yeah. Yes.
And the last question is about Muta content as a video or music. Like, what do you think works better? Like the combination of audiovisual elements or just the audio?
I mean, with Muta, I think you have to have the visual.
Okay.
But music is the #1 inspirational media that, at least in the American population, people say they feel inspired by and feel like transcendent by. It's super understudied. It's so powerful. It can have obviously not only mood changing effects, but also can totally affect our how we behave, our cognitive capacities. I mean, music is just so absolutely powerful. It's definitely one of my passions to dive into music studies a little bit more than I already did further down my career. But I don't think Muta would apply from a theoretical standpoint, because how do you, I mean, maybe because there needs to be obviously that intensification, and you can argue that maybe a change in music could be an intensification, but obviously it's still related on like relation. So I don't know if you can go a little abstract and it's like the relation between, you know, like the two different tonalities in music that then crash, and that could be an elicitor. Maybe that could be an expansion of kind of an abstract expansion of relation model theory. And only if that's done, then maybe it makes sense. But otherwise, I would say for Muta, we do need the visual. But as also a lot of studies have shown, even with just elevation, the music is just, even with film, with, you know, visual material, so important to create a strong transcendent or Muta experience.
Okay, yeah, that's really, I mean, it makes sense and really interesting. Maybe also further studies can look at this also a little more in depth, if that makes a difference, if it's just like audio, also audiovisual in comparison. Yeah, like I learned so much today. I think like everyone who watched this video too, we are really happy that you took your time and took the time to actually have this interview with us. It was so good. Like we're really happy with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you all for having me on. And yeah, if you have any more specific Muta questions, please reach out to Ellen Fisk and Thomas Schubert and Beate Seift and all of those amazing researchers that really came up with that concept. I just try to learn from the originators and apply it to media. That's all I did.